Hello, everybody. Welcome to Toolkit's Digital Storytelling Live. This is Being Normal Online, experimenting with digital absurdism with Vidya Rajan. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm currently streaming in from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I want to acknowledge that this is currently this is unceded land. It was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My guest Vidya tonight is on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar Boodja people. And I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present, and extend that to everyone tuning in from across the unceded nations of what is currently called Australia. My name is Rory Green. I'm a writer, editor, and digital media artist, and I'm the facilitator for Toolkit's digital storytelling. My guest tonight is Vidya Rajan, who is a writer and performer currently based in Australia, working across screenwriting, theatre, comedy, and digital space. She's a former writer in residence at the Malthouse Theatre, graduate of the VCA, and a recipient of Screen Australia's developer program. And her work has often been described as surreal, inventive, darkly funny, and probing of the contemporary moment. Recently, her sketch writing as part of the feed on SBS won the 2022 Augie Award for Best Comedy Writing, and her digital interactive experience In Search of Lost Scroll took home Best Experimental Artwork at the 2022 Melbourne Fringe Awards. She can next be seen as part of the core ensemble on the new Auntie Donna sitcom series, Auntie Donna's Coffee Cafe, on which she also worked as a writer and story consultant. I'm so excited to talk with Vidya. But first, a little bit about Toolkits, a little bit of housekeeping. Toolkits is for those who don't know, Toolkits is a 12-week program for writers aged 30 and under to develop their skills in a unique and exciting online environment. Toolkits is run by Express Media, who've been around for over 30 years, developing, supporting, and promoting young writers, whether it's through workshops that develop skills, through opportunities for constructive feedback and publication, like VoiceWorks magazine, or through awards and programs that recognize excellence. Toolkits is generously supported by the Copyright Cultural Fund. This session tonight is going to be available on YouTube as a resource into the future, and it's going to be captioned in the coming days. If you'd like to ask any questions, there's several ways you can do that. We have our new online event platform, the Express Media Zone. You can ask questions on Twitter using the hashtag EMToolkits, or you can do so via the live chat on YouTube. I think it's outside of where my face is. We would love your questions, so please add them into the chat, and we'll touch on them towards the end. That's my spiel over. Hey, Vidya, how's it going?
Hi. Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm so excited you're here. It's going to be extremely chill, normal conversation.
Yep.
Between two normal people. Maybe a good place to start would be to talk a bit about what you do, the kind of things you make, and I guess what you're interested in exploring in what you do make.
Yeah. So, I mean, you did a good job in the bio, but I guess, a little history. I come from, theatre, like as a performance maker, and that's sort of where I started. And I feel like that's the basis of a lot of my methodological lens, tossing out a word like that. But yeah, so I come from theatre, and then I moved into TV, and through doing comedy as well, like a lot of TV writing. And I guess a lot of my theatre training was in like what we call like game-based making or devised making, which is where you are creating like, it's called contemporary performance, but like work that's not necessarily always written down, but often has like audience interactivity or participatory art elements. And yeah, like comes about through like improvisation. So I feel like that link has weirdly come back into my digital practice, because a lot of digital work, you could look at it from like a game-based lens, or as like just another space, like a theatre space. And with its own relationship with the audience. And so like I feel like a lot of my lens on it comes from a theatrical point of view. But yeah, I also, for a job, I work in TV a lot as a writer, and I also enjoy that. But that's probably one of the more commercial bits of my practice.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, was
So
that a good answer?
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting to hear about your like theater background and how you kind of bring that kind of participatory sort of approach from theater into kind of literary spaces and digital literary spaces, because I totally see that in some of the stuff that that you've made recently, and that hopefully we'll like kind of get into. I feel like maybe a good place to start is In Search of a Lost Scroll, because it came out pretty recently. It has done extremely well. It's amazing. How did it kind of come about?
How did it come about? So Fringe had this digital discovery grant, which I encourage everyone to apply for. I think they're still running it. They might be closed this year. And they basically give you a bit of money, not too much, to make a work that lives online. It was sort of a response to pandemic. So I hope they're continuing it, because digital art doesn't always have to come about just because of a deadly once-in-a-century virus. And I'd been thinking for a while, because I'd done like a bit of stuff on Twine, I'd done like other kind of internet-y things, and I wanted to do something a bit more ambitious in scope. And I guess a lot of the things I'm interested in, which I feel like you share as well, are just like what is space online? Like how is space privatized? What is selfhood if you're somebody who's like plugged memes into your head every day since you were 13? Like, like that kind of thing. So I was trying to think of like how even just the feeling of the internet has changed from when I was quite young to, like the last 15 years, that it's become this very monopolized place, and what feeling that leaves in your body as you interact with it. And that was kind of like my curiosity starting point. And then I've been thinking about making that work for a few years, but I'd always been like, and then maybe I'm on stage and I'm doing this. And then it just kind of clicked that I was like, it's literally a work about online space. Maybe it could happen online. And then I realized that like I wanted to use the browser as like the framework, and the feeling of scrolling as sort of like, as like a part of the narrative of it. And just like, because the way you scroll the internet has changed from like, even 10 years ago, like just the literal physical act of it. So I wanted to, that's where the impulse started. And then it morphed into like the spec fic kind of thing, where I trained a bot on my, with a friend, I should say Pat Rehill's like a machine learning researcher. So it wasn't all me, but on my Twitter archive, and we kind of programmed it to have one request that you kill it, but you can also have a conversation with it and it'll respond as me. Like some people message me and they're like, is that you? And I was like, no, it is, but it's not. But I'm not there. I'm not sitting there with the keyboard. But that's kind of like a potted history of how that came about.
I love that. There's so many different parts of this I'd love to unpack. I love what you were saying about like the act of scrolling changing in the like kind of last 15 years. Like there's something really really cursed about the kind of invention of the endless scroll, rather than pagination.
Yes. It's about it's about agency, right? Which is theatrically very interesting to me as well. So like I think earlier web stuff, there's more agency about leaving a platform, or like it's not completely, the UX isn't designed to be so pleasing almost. It kind of assumes that you have some sense of rational control and you can go and look at links and you can do what you want. And then there's that some sense of like discovery if you end up in a new place, whereas platforms now are designed to keep you on there. And like, the way that like even there's a whole debate now with Twitter and third-party sites and Reddit as well. So it's just sort of like they want to keep you on the platform. And so the experience is made as seamless as possible. And any links to things outside are deprioritized in the algorithm. It's also, the way Facebook operated before it completely, if I can say this, shit the bed, like as a site was, like it was this, you don't need to leave, your friends are here, the news is here, like everything, the videos are here, and and what does it take? Like that kind of totalizing approach seems convenient, but it's actually pretty sinister. And in like what it allows you to do as someone online, and like the communities it allows you to access. So, and scrolling is part of that, like the infinite scroll, is I think quite an insidious thing. So yeah.
With it, like In Search of Lost Scroll, like the way, for those who haven't kind of like played it, like there's a lot of different, like, I'm not phrasing this very well. It was like a lot of different digital elements in the piece. You know, you kind of move through, I guess, like different screens or sections that each have kind of a very different, or a different kind of feel, and you like make use of, like you've mentioned the bot that you created, but also like there is like an element of like VR in the piece. There is like your face being like put onto like various like 3D models and textures. It's very like
spending
like
time
kaleidoscopic,
in
right?
Yeah, no, just every time I was just like the trauma of spending time in Blender with a 3D model of my head. Like I'm just like, or still recovering.
Well, that kind
It
of fits
is.
in with my question, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, how did you approach like putting all of these pieces together, or like, and where, like, did you like plan out the work in advance where you're like, oh, I'm gonna like put in this tool or like this thing, or were there like, you know, things like
Yeah.
whether Blender or the bot or other software available to you that like only kind of
Yeah.
became apparent while making it?
For sure. Like I feel like a lot of art probably, especially indie art, it's sort of your limitations sometimes become the thing that shapes it. Or well, this is from I think a good lesson from theater training and like performance making training is like what an exercise you often do is like what are the things in the room, and instead of viewing them as blocks, you're like, well, that's the scope of the work. And I think that kind of mentality is really useful, because I think with digital work or with like emerging tech, you can get very like, well, I need to buy like the $5,000 the rig, or like, you know, stuff like that. Whereas maybe if you view the tools or the limitations as the generative part of the work, it can be quite useful. It's something that I felt was solidified in this. So it was a combination. Like there were things I definitely knew I wanted. Like, so the bot was like, it's like a Python kind of thing. So that was like upskilling on that a little bit, but also I had someone to help with that. But the other stuff with the UX of the website, that was like, again, like an element of like, it's quite interesting. It's very hard. I don't know if you found this, or unless you want to build stuff from scratch, which takes a lot of time. A lot of like sites are set up now to basically get you to pay for a million things, like, which is again a comment on how the internet has changed, like from like more open access, but like even to design a website that is more responsive and isn't just like your standard Squarespace and is doing something interesting, the amount of plugins and like the kind of things that I needed to, you know, investigate. Like I was like, thank God I had that grant, because I was like, this is like so much money just to create something that is more bespoke. Like if I don't want to like make this from scratch, which I don't have time for. Yeah. So it's I don't know what I was saying. Yeah, so some tools came about later, and some I knew from the start. Stuff with my head. I guess that comes from like, I guess I'm always quite interested in like digital tactility, and as part of this as well, like, so this work, if you don't know, it's kind of a future version of myself. This bot, I've been turned into a bot that people just use to chat, like aging Gen Z millennials in an aged care facility used to chat to, like it's like their friend, which is what I think will happen to my data. Best case scenario. It's like my Twitter archive of like humorous quips. But and then the bot at some point is like basically telling the person who's in the experience, I kind of want to die, and you're on a tribunal where you have to decide whether that's a genuine thing that it wants, or whether it's just, you know, needs a bit of maintenance. And that's kind of the premise of it, and I kind of use that to explore like a history of the internet. But what is, yeah, so I kind of wanted like, I wanted a feeling of like interacting with this body that's not there. So like all the 3D model of my head, which is also like glitches and is like this thing that you can move about in the space. I feel like that maybe and it changes as you go through. So I feel like that gives you that more visceral element. So that's where that came from. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Is there was there anything that I guess kind of like push the limit of like too hard technically to implement, or maybe like, I guess something that else that's really interesting to me is like when I look through like, and for me being interested in sort of what is how digital stories are being made technically, and what, them kind of material pieces are. I was like inspecting the page like every time something changed to be like, what tool did you make it with this? Did you use a web builder, or did you is this iframed in from somewhere else? And
a lot of it's iframed it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing to me seeing all of these different tools that kind of are their own, run by a website that offers a very specific service, that you were then able to kind of like embed within your work and kind of create this really this constantly kind of like shifting and transforming piece, almost a bit kind of like a Frankenstein of different like digital tools, which is like really cool, because it's like for me, like when I look at small tools like SurveyMonkey or whatever, I'm like, it's really hard to like think outside the constraints of that particular that platform or tool kind of enforces on you as a user. And this work doesn't it feels like you're really kind of like pushing out of like what different software is able to do.
A few people have said that to me, and I guess it wasn't conscious, but I guess it's like it is that sort of approach of like idea first or journey first approach. I'm like, what do I want this to feel like, or what am I saying here? Like the quiz that's embedded in it, I was just like, that's an early artifact, and I just think I don't know, I was like, it would be fun to do, but I also think it was the right moment for it, like emotionally in the piece, because it's I won't spoil it. I can send a link to it, like it's up again, because I've had to put it up for something else. But yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, because I was just like, I sometimes feel like maybe if somebody came from a very like software background, maybe like you, Rory, like maybe sometimes you have those constraints. You're like, this is the way to make work, but I've just kind of come at it from my own, I guess, practice, and then have a few tech skills, and they've come in handy. But I don't know if that helps. Like maybe sometimes it helps to just be like, what is the idea, or what is the journey, or what is the emotion here, and what tool can meet that, rather than doing a tool first approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's kind of cool to me is that like it doesn't feel like it creates something much more than the sum of all of these different, like there's something really interesting about the way that you've connected these different kind of digital experiences into this like larger narrative. And you kind of just spoke about, sort of touched on it briefly when you were talking about where the quiz kind of sat in terms of the emotion of the piece. I'd love to hear about like the kind of I guess the plotting of satire within a kind of like interactive digital space, and how that kind of compares with your experiences, whether it's like writing for television or I guess theater, as well as I guess more like visual spaces than textual. Back.
No, I mean, satire is an interesting word. I mean, like satire is something that has a target, like, so did you find it satirical, like, or do you?
I don't think I was not very precise with my wording.
No,
but I guess like the kind of sorry,
there is a satirical element, so like we can screen share later in the other session, but so it starts in this kind of very I studied like the websites of things like what is it? It has a very evil name, like something like Raytheon or like what those tech company or Palantir,
Volunteer.
like
Yeah.
I love how like they just I'm like, that's like the bad stone in Lord of, well, why would you name yourself?
Yeah.
So many of the tech companies literally name themselves after like sci-fi or fantasy concepts that are clearly the bad guys. Like it's very cartoonish, but so yeah, all those websites like this is like this is the research portion. I wanted to imitate the feeling, like, and they all have this like kind of seamless UX, and they all have this very like there's just certain colors, there's just certain like movement, like speaking of scrolling. So like that was satirical in the sense that it was like that is a target for me, like the language they speak, like it can all, I'm sure people are familiar with this, but there's one called endo.ai, I think it's for an app, and Grimes has created some tunes for it, of course, that is like supposed to like help you sleep better. But the website, and this is a very common tech thing, is like if you read it, you'd think they were literally solving the problem of consciousness and were going to make us ascend to a new stage of evolution. So just the kind of like that speak and the way it is in copy, like all that was really fun to do, and like to create that sensation at the start. And so in this work, it's a future, it's like a identity storage agency that basically reanimates people from their data, and the language around it is like connecting you to the future version of yourself, or reconnect with loved ones and no barriers. Like it's better than that, but that's sort of the tone. So that's a satirical target. And I often find, I think, if you don't want to make points too heavy, like sometimes it's fun to think of the thing that irritates you in the world and a funny way that you can replicate and thus critique it. So there is a satirical element there, so you weren't wrong. But apart from that, I feel like a lot of the humor is just, it is my humor, but it's also very like, there's an absurdity to it, like the different eras of the work. There's like, so the quiz is like very in this kind of like early BuzzFeed or like, what was that? Angel Fire kind of tone, like, like very, it's almost like, but I could also have a bit of fun with it because the bot is kind of trying to show you its consciousness in this work. So when stuff is a bit scrambled, or when like, it's like very like internet rudimentary language that's like makes sense, but at times seems histrionic. Like, I don't know, like just, it's like if you spent any time on the internet, like I feel like that's kind of second nature, that kind of cadence to you. So it's just fun to replicate that and like push it in the direction of this work. I think with interactive work, a bit about humor, I feel, is like there's somebody there, right? So it's not just like putting a joke at someone, it's like giving them room to participate in that humor. So obviously a quiz is like a fun way of doing that because you get to choose something. But also the way you talk to the bot, like a few people sent me screenshots and like the bot's just being like really rude to them, or like really like saying like very maudlin things that they didn't have to respond to, and then they get into that game as well. And I guess I'm a bit lucky there in that it was trained on my tweet, so it is already deranged. But it's just like providing opportunities for people to like participate in the humor rather than the humor coming at them, that I often find quite rewarding to do.
Yeah, I like that idea of participating in the humor. I think I love you using the phrase the eras of the piece.
There's 3/4.
I was like, wow, just like Taylor Swift. But also, it's a really interesting thing where like when you were talking about the kind of way that the satire is set up in that kind of first section with the language of the tech companies, like that sort of feed off of where surveillance capitalism is their kind of underlying business model. And then when you mentioned the Angel Fire kind of aesthetics, it's interesting thinking about how like the kind of aesthetics and kind of signifiers of these different areas of technology or eras of the internet kind of help set up the journey that you kind of go on through the piece? And I guess,
Yeah.
do you like have particular, do you have like fond associations with particular eras of the internet? And like, how does that, or maybe eras of the internet that you like abhor, I guess, and that, how does that kind of find its
I
way
mean,
into your work?
for sure. I mean, nostalgia is so interesting, and nostalgia on the internet even more so. I don't know if people have read this book. There's two great books I'll recommend that were really helpful for me in the lead up to this. Lurking.
Okay.
It's awesome. It's
I
like
don't know this one.
it's lurking, how a person became a user, which is basically what
Yeah.
this work is about. I think it's Joanna McNeill. She's an amazing writer. And then Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell, also incredible. And there is a lot of glitch in this work. And I'm really interested in the idea in general and other stuff as well, like being the glitch in the space, like being the thing that doesn't quite fit, and how that can open you up to finding what's wrong in systems if you just follow the glitch. And in this case, the bot is glitching. It doesn't want to be what it is anymore. So that's yeah, it's just a great read. But one of the things I think Joanna talks about, or Joanne, I'm not sure, is the idea of nostalgia as a powerful way to reclaim, I guess, ethically reclaims, like using, not being afraid of nostalgia, and like using that to understand what's been lost, especially with regards to the internet, because it is quite new, but we already feel nostalgic for eras on it. And like, I feel like Angelfire was even like before like my time of consciousness on the internet, but like I still have the nostalgia for it because, you know, the bleed from it was still there, like in the era that I was kind of more online. So I guess, yeah, I am nostalgic for that, very like that, you know, I sometimes joke that I was raised by MSN Messenger, like, you know, parents were
Yeah.
at work and I was just on there, like just going, like chatting to straight, like I used to catfish a lot as a child. So I don't know if that's good or bad or responsible for everything that's wrong with me. But I feel like, yeah, I think there's a nostalgia for that freedom of anonymity, like, you know, and this work explores like anonymity quite a bit. And I think also just like the work kind of ends at like, there's the MySpace era, and then it kind of catapults you into the future from there, because I'm like, we all know what happened next. So this is also an interesting thing about digital work, like, because I'm making it at this time and we all exist in this space that is so privatized. I'm like, I thought I was going to do another stage where we get more into the current way the internet is, but I'm like, oh no, but you're on it. Like if you're doing this work, you literally just came from there. So I don't need to replicate that in this experience. Like it's more satisfying to go into a weird future. So I kind of skipped the kind of ends around 2012 is probably,
Mm,
it's got like a Tumblr aesthetic thing happening at the end there. Like,
yeah.
also very important to my development. And then everything you need to know about the current privatized internet, which is probably like my worst era, is already part of like, it's there every second of the day. So
Yeah.
it's like, you don't need to put that in the work. It's already there. So yeah.
It's interesting. Oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff I would love to kind of circle back on. Gosh, I think maybe I want to touch on what how you skipped this kind of current era that we're in, which is an
Yeah.
interesting kind of when I hear you say that, I think about like I think, oh, like, well, what about the kind of setting for the sort of future audience of this piece? But then it kind
Yeah.
of highlights the fact that, or it kind of is a good segue to the idea of like archival and longevity in digital work. And I know it's been like a kind
Yeah.
of a bit of a journey for you, kind of actually having this piece running as an ongoing operational thing. Do you want to
Yeah.
like speak
Well,
to, I guess,
sure.
the launch period of the piece and then the kind of
Yeah.
where it's at now?
No, it's interesting because it's I think people have a few underlying assumptions about digital work that like, which in a weird way harken to more early internet, like open free internet times, where like people are like, oh, it's free and it's cheap, and I was like, it's neither of those things, because especially if you're doing your own like independent project, because there's hosting fees, there's widgets, there's just a huge amount of cost, like, you know, to keep something running. And then I guess the other aspect of it is So that's one thing. But also, like, I think, yeah, like time moves really fast, and people also, like, for some reason we have this assumption that everything online is forever, which is not true, because so much is gone, and also every day we're losing more. Like, I was just having this conversation today about like how streamers are taking off, you know, shows that existed. Like, everything is impermanent. Like, the cloud is a physical thing. Like, if a shark bites a wire, half your stuff is gone. Like, so it's just like we have this assumption that like it's eternal, it's in the air, and I was like, none of that is true. It's like any other art piece, really. So I don't know, what was the question? Yeah, I guess, like, for me, I'm like, I don't worry so much about like, oh, how will it be in the future? Because I think, like, all, maybe again coming from performance, I'm like, art is responsive to its time. Like, this feeling of posterity you have, like, when you read a novel or whatever, I'm like, it's kind of a delusion, I think. Like, you know, like it's so, and especially as a performance maker, like, that is such a like time-based art form where like you make something and then it's gone. So I think maybe I have a slightly chiller relationship with art. Like, I don't, you know, I'm like, it's okay.
Totally.
Everything disappears. The sun's gonna burn out in 30,000 years, whatever. Like, you know, like, it's fine. But so I don't know if that's my answer, which is just that it's like any other art piece, and maybe putting on this kind of pressure for it to somehow be eternal just because it's online doesn't really make sense. But in terms of storage, I do feel like maybe this is a bigger question, like, what is the infrastructure? Because every time I have to remount this, there are a few things I have to pay for again, like, you know, the hosting and stuff like that. And then sometimes I wonder, so there are, like, you know, there's a lot of digital work that institutions in Australia do, but they're much more like, some indie spaces, like, you know, I know, like, Runway does digital work, or Foray, or like all these other like magazines. And I guess if you can get stuff in there, there's a bit of assurance that it will live for longer and you don't have to bear those costs. But also, how long? Like, things collapse all the time, and then what happens? So I don't know.
Oh gosh, there's like I don't know if I've like written it down here, but like what did come across my mind as I was like looking at work that you've been involved in to kind of talk about for tonight. I did try and come back to work that you curated for Darabin a couple of years ago that I can't find online, and I'm like, wow, there was a lot of amazing work that
it was
disappeared
great
in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's really, so I curated this exhibition for Darabin Council. Like, again, it was like a pandemic thing. They were like, we want digital work. And so that, as a curator, like, you got to set your thematic, I guess. And like, there were two other curators of different exhibitions. They had different themes. And I was interested in, like, I think my prompt was like, anything that's, what does digital tactility mean to you? Like, you know, and I was quite interested in getting artists from other art forms onto that space. And I think, Rory, like, I asked you to like, so I think a lot of the barrier to entry can often be like tech knowledge. So I was like, but I feel like into art stuff is where a lot of interesting stuff happens. So people who may not have that tech skill as yet, but who had something to say about, you know, that feeling, the tactility of being online. I didn't want that to be a barrier. So like, I remember I connected you with an artist who was making a twine work, right?
Gemma.
And Gemma. So and that enabled the work to, you know, get to where it was. So there was some really great, there was like people who did more like bitsy games. One work that I really enjoyed was like somebody who was a DJ, and that's something that takes place in the club, which is this very physical environment. But you know, I talked to them before about like, what they love about that experience is communion and like the dissolution of the body. So I was like, well, what can the online offer? Like, can you create an experience that does that somehow? And they've created like this amazing thing that's called like Room 2.0, and which has gone on to other stuff. So it was, I think, but all of that it did get taken down because the council, I think it was in the agreement that it was only up for like a year or something. And then I remember mailing them and being like, oh, but you've got an archive page, right? They were like, no. So the works exist, like, you know, those itch files are still there, like, but projects are there, but they're the individual artists, like,
And it's interesting seeing, actually, Eamon has just mentioned in the YouTube chat here that one of the pieces from that collection, Panda Wong's pieces, is up on her site, and
Oh, great. Yeah.
I think maybe that ties into a question I wanted to ask you about In Search of Lost Scroll, about, I guess, that kind of idea
Yeah.
of archiving and preservation when you have this work that like fundamentally can't exist forever unless you're
Yeah.
a billionaire. You know, you're willing to pay for all those
Yeah.
fees. But you've got a like a playthrough of it on your site,
I
right?
do, which I just like was like the day before I had to take it. Like I was like, I can't renew this subscription again. And I was like, just tapped a friend, and I was like, can you just do a playthrough? It's not the ideal conditions because ideally you'd want a few people to be doing it. So like, there's bits of the work where you may come across a stranger. Well, yeah, I won't spoil when, but yeah, but it was just very nice of them to even do the playthrough. So I was like, at least there's something to document it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the documentation of like digital work that maybe doesn't have can't have like an indefinite lifespan, and how you kind of approach that is, I don't know, it's really interesting. It's something we've not talked about too much with the participants in the Toolkits program. Is that something that's like common in because I don't know much about theater work and how those kind of pieces come together. Is that sort of documentation common in that space, or?
It is, but it is often when on an indie project, I think can be like the last thing because it costs money. Like if you're hiring someone to document it really well in theater, like you're doing kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those National Theatre Live productions like that are in cinemas where but they're done so like, you know, they basically create films, like they do close-ups and they like kind of switch between and all that. So like to get a theater show, some people document it that way. And it's like, you're paying a lot for that usually. And like when you're, you know, trying to make a show basically as an indie artist, that's the last thing you're thinking of is like, you just need to get it up. And like, so now it is more part of my process even in theater, but I've got like shows that are like will never live again, that I love, but like that I have no record of except for a few photos and a review somewhere, you know. But it is quite common in theater to document it, but it's often quite static. Because you don't have national theatre budgets, so and it doesn't ever capture like what it was like to be there. But I hadn't thought about documenting digital work till this work, and the idea of a playthrough was like I don't even know if that's what it should be called, but I guess, you know, comes from gaming, and I was just like, why not? So maybe so maybe it's a good practice, I think, because it's like at least you've got like something that shows what the experience was like rather than just pointing to stills or
Absolutely. I mean, for a lot of my work, even if it's not necessarily not interactive or anything like that, even if it's just online of some form, I like have started getting into the habit of like bookmarking it in Wayback Machine.
Great.
There is like an ongoing
that's such
copy.
A good idea.
And I have had pieces that have just like the online journal doesn't exist anymore, and it's nice to, you know, you can kind of republish it on your site or whatever, but it's nice to then be able to point to like, oh, this is what it looked like in situ.
I should
and
do
I'm kicking myself that I didn't do that. I'm trying to start doing that for other work that I see online that I like, because I do take for granted that it's just going to be there forever. Like there were work from the exhibition you curated that was in the Toolkits reading list that I then had to like.
Well,
find,
I could, you know, we can ask the artists.
With some of the artists, Panda, I think that's, you know, it's great that Panda was able to put her piece up online. But it's also interesting when I think about the kind of infrastructure of In Search of Lost Scroll and that kind of the issues around keeping it online with all the sort of subscriptions to it, with this work that is so much about like being sort of
ironic,
control. Like the final kind of like piece, like the end state of your work kind of being like, I've taken this online because I can no longer afford the various subscriptions that are, you know, tech companies require for me to keep it up.
I know,
It's a great definitive statement.
It's kind of what it's like, it's one of those moments where you're making it and you're like, oh, the thing I'm making is like, the materials I'm making it with are about the thing I'm making. Like, you know, like, so it's like, you cannot unless you want to like again start from scratch and like do it yourself. But you cannot get you know how music just used to play on websites all the time? And I understand why they've taken it off, but it's because the web is geared towards commerce now. Like it's like a perfect example of like it is so hard to get autoplay happening on a web page now. And I did not manage it, and I could not be bothered. Like I've got a play button, but I was just like, because apparently it turns away consumers, like if music just plays. And so nobody, like on the major, so I used Webflow. Nobody thinks that like someone may want to do that now. And they make the decision for you, because of course every web page is to sell something, whether it's a service or a feeling or a brand. So like, don't do that. They've just taken it out of the options. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it really, it's bleak times.
It's bleak times, yeah.
Before we kind of continue, I just want to remind everybody watching that you can leave a comment via Twitter, #EMToolkits, or you can post in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to them really soon.
Yeah, please. Please ask questions.
There's something I wanted to come back to this idea of like I guess your I guess the absurdity within the work that you make, and there's a couple of really interesting points you've mentioned earlier. You just talked about, you know, being aware of the material of what you're making. You know, you're making something about the material. You're using materials to make work about those materials, and there's something kind of, I don't know, to me a bit absurd in that there's something really reflexive about that, like, or like this kind of Ouroboros, which is a bit silly. And I just want to throw back to something you mentioned earlier about the glitch and what Legacy said. Did you say it was kind of like the glitch about this thing that's not supposed to be there? This kind of that to me sounds like there's like a connection there with like absurdity and like that thing that doesn't really. I guess I'm interested in like humor, not just in the kind of story that kind of you plot, but also in the kind of aesthetics and affordances of the digital tools or platforms that you've used in your work. Do you have a kind of?
That's a good way of putting it. Like, I guess the glitch is inherently kind of absurd because it's unexpected, and it's like, not in your. So a way of thinking about absurdity, like in comedy at least, is people often, and you'll see like baby comedy writers especially, is like throwing in a random thing, and they're like, that's absurd, right? And it is, but it's also like absurdity is often like, I think, what everyone comes to something with a set of expectations, and like you can't cater for every audience member, but you have your ideal one in mind. And I often, how do I explain it? I feel like absurdity still needs to play vaguely in the arena of expectations, but just change things enough that you don't recognize it. Like, you still need to have some agreed upon basis, otherwise it's nonsense, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, so I feel like if you're looking at online materials, like, I mean, the internet is inherently an absurd place in that, like, it is such a contrast of information, and that's what creates its absurdity. But it's also, you do expect that, and like the moments that are most delightful are when like it tweaks that just a little bit. I don't know, I haven't really thought this through in a very sophisticated way, but I guess using the materials of like surprise or glitch or like cursed images are like a big part of my work. I think like we all have our expectations of what they look like, and if you can just like tip it into silliness or just like push it in a direction, so like, you know, there's glitch, we know what a glitch looks like online, but what if the glitch has like a 3D head that you can move? Like, you know, just like taking it one or two steps further is probably, I think, where the playfulness is.
I'd love to hear you unpack.
I'm thinking out loud. Like, I don't know if I've ever thought this through before. So yeah.
I think it all makes sense. I think you've articulated it well. I'd love to. You did just mention cursed images, and I guess, you know, we're both, everyone here's normal and probably knows what that is, but for those who are maybe not as normal, I'd love to hear your definition of curse image, or like what to you are you looking for if you're finding a cursed image to use in a work?
I feel like I generated a few. Did you get the link? I don't know if people are getting those links, but
Oh, I'll post them. We'll get
one
if Mia can maybe reshare them to the
maybe
chat.
just the Twitter, the tweet of the image.
I'm opening it up now. So
yeah.
yeah, okay. Okay.
This is like one of my favorite tweets. It's not even that cursed, but it's yeah, I guess a cursed. I think like Gio Tolentino has a better essay on what a cursed image is than I could articulate. But I think it is. I think it's that similar thing of like something that is almost what you think it is, but then has that aesthetic of like either like shittiness of the internet, or like is body horror is a big part of cursed images, which I find really interesting because like the internet's like this. You've got meat space and you've got internet space, and but the body is the subject of the internet. I often think it is the subject of memes. Like so much of memes are about body horror or like, like carnal stuff. So I feel like rather than being about the mind, the internet's about the body. That's my hot take. But yeah, so I feel like cursed images tap into that. Like they tap into that unease. Like they get to your to a sensation in you that a normal image would not. But yeah, I love this one because to me this is like when people ask what absurdity is or absurdism is, even like in a comedy sense, I'm like, it's this image, because it's like it should be a rabbit, and it's almost a rabbit because it's got the long ears, but it's a snake. And it's the earnestness of like treating it like a rabbit. I don't know. It just to me is like explains humor.
I love that. I hadn't really thought about the I guess like uncanny in that absurdism, right? Where I like you're right. It does look like if you squint at the screen, it does kind of look like a rabbit, and that's much better than if it was I guess like a frog or a
right. If you did a frog, like it would still go like, haha, it's not a rabbit, because we all want to laugh, but it's funnier that it's a snail. And that it's like a thing that leaves goo and has that visceral, like, look at it. But also it kind of looks like a rabbit because it's got its long things and like you can hold it that way. And why is it so big? But yeah. So anyway, I think it explains how absurdism isn't randomness, but it is still that.
Great. I love that we get the image back. It really, really. And I think like that idea of what how you would describe defining absurdism as opposed to I guess that entry-level comedy kind of perspective on absurdism. I see that in like the discussions earlier about like the sort of the copy of these tech companies, right? This idea of like you're able to take
what they feel like.
You recognize it as such, and that's why it kind of works, even though at the same time it's like more than that.
I think that's that's again like I guess from performance training, but I think it's a great lesson for like digital making as well, as like what are the set of expectations somebody's coming to the work with. And how can you play? So where on the internet are they from? Like, I think this is, again, like a myth of art is universal. Clearly, we all live in our niches now. Like TikTok has like definitively proved that. So it's just sort of like, who are you making it for? Are they like book talkers? Are they people who need to be terminally online? Are they people who need to have lived through the great Twitter era of blah, blah, blah? Like, and I think we have a tendency, especially in like high art circles, to discount things if they are niche in some way. But I'm like, but everything is niche. It's just that like white male canon has been made on niche. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's sort of like, it's okay if your work only speaks to somebody who had to have been on Tumblr from X to Y. Like, that's okay. It's still a good work. It'll find its audience. I think that sometimes making work online is giving yourself permission to not be universalist. As long as it has an
Yeah.
emotional journey or an impact, it will reach, you know? So
How does that,
yeah.
when you speak about like emotional journey, like how do you kind of how do you
Yeah.
balance that when you've got work that is really absurd? And like I think there's something kind of I don't know, part of, for me, when I see really absurd stuff, and you talked about it with the body horror, there's like an alienation
Yeah.
that kind of makes absurdity really funny, but then like
Yeah.
how do you keep something kind of
Mm.
that tells something meaningful and has kind of a heart to it amidst all
Yeah,
of
I mean,
that kind of chaos?
there's so many ways, like if we're talking techniques, there's so much to get into. I guess in general though, I would say like the voice of a piece is really important. So you can have all the body horror you want, but you need to know like not what you're saying. It's not a thesis statement, but what is the feeling you want to explore as a human? Like what is your connection to it as the maker? And then I think ask yourself what the person interacting with it feels at each stage of it, like would feel at each stage of it. So like if this bit's going to alienate me, like if it's a lot of body horror, what am I giving them right after that like keeps them safe or delights them? Like I think delight is it's again like a more participatory art term perhaps, but like how can you create like a sensation of delight in your audience? And that can be very simple. It can be like this just fun way to like, there's a little, I don't know, you leave a trail of stars when you move your cursor, or it can be like, a joke. A joke is the quickest form of delight. Like, so once you give people that, they will give you something. So like I think all participatory art is exchange, and to get something from someone, you need to give them something. And so like if the body horror is going to alienate someone, you need to couch it in a way that also creates a sense of being held or delight, so then they'll invest in the process more. So that's a more technical answer, but apart from the technical aspect of it, I think it's more about just knowing what you're exploring and making sure that that voice is carrying people through it.
Yeah. So I like using the word delight, and you say that you
Yeah.
use that in the kind of participatory kind of theater space,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
like I'm familiar with that term, but from like UX design perspective, like they use the same idea of
Sure.
design for
Yeah.
delight in kind of like
Yeah.
objects and spaces and
Yeah.
uh,
I guess we would also call it like gifting or play, like how do you
yeah.
create play, or how do you create reciprocity? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I love that. Last, I feel like we're coming up to nearing the end of the session, so like a final call for people tuning in. If they have any questions for Vidya, please drop them in the chat. We're really keen to answer any burning questions you have. I think something that I would be interested to hear from you, Vidya, while we see if anyone has anything they want to ask, is to hear about, I guess, what you're consuming at the moment, and like, are there any, apart from yourself, who's creating the funniest, weirdest work online
Oh,
at the moment?
that's so interesting. I've been consuming with a lot of it's been quite serious. Like there's a lot of people doing like a lot of emerging tech AI stuff. So there's a few like really good meme accounts I follow. There's one called like
Please put
Reddit
the meme account.
Stories, which is like, so yeah, I can drop the links to them. There's this one that it's very new. So yeah, get on it while it's hot. But there's this one which is like, I just enjoy, it's so cursed in that like it's in a lot of it's filmed in like playthroughs or in VR chat, and then it's just like map Reddit stories onto it, and it's just like, I don't know, it's very pleasing to me, but you might be very turned off by it.
I
So
get
I'm
these on
finding
my
like,
TikTok all the time.
yeah, do you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that's a new one. Like only like 1,000 followers or so. So I'm like, yeah, I've been enjoying that. I mean, everybody. This is like a classic. I'll just stick with Insta for now. Yeah, this meme account is great. I really feel like there's a really good time for the Insta memers. I think that's happening.
Do you think like there's what are your favorite, like, do you have a genre of like favorite Insta memes? Is there kind of like something that you are drawn to in like your favorite Insta memes?
Yeah, I mean, it changes. There's kind of like there's so many. I like there's like the spiritual mashup, because I feel like that does get to the heart of the internet, which is there's this sort of like I think there's one called like I Need God in My Life or something like that, but it's just like it's always like about trying to achieve transcendence or like blessings, but like it's also so horrible. Like I don't know, I feel like something about that neediness really speaks to me. And in Scroll is like, yeah, I think I am very obsessed with the idea of like, because I think the internet promises transcendence, but of course it doesn't. Like it's just like, oh, we'll ascend our bodies and we'll like merge together and we'll have communion, but then it's a bodily experience. Like you can't be on there without a body. So yeah, I think memes that get at that are really, that niche. There's also, core on TikTok. Have you heard of core?
I have from this ages ago, but it blipped past my For You page.
Yeah.
So I feel like I didn't.
I've been watching
catch
that a lot
most of it.
lately, and I've been feeling, because I haven't been putting content on TikTok, which like apparently is very surprising to a lot of people who know me. But I don't know, I just haven't quite. I think it's like I haven't made that decision. Like it's almost like a psychic decision to expose myself to yet another platform. Like, so I've just been a consumer. But when I found Core, I was like, oh, I think I understand now. like I was like, I feel like I finally found my page. It's like, it goes back to the absurdity thing of like, and aesthetics and vibes and things, where it's just like, it's reached a point where, and I think it's often very funny because it's reached a point where it's like, you can't know. It's kind of acknowledging that we're at this point of information density and niches, that you literally can't know all of these, and you can't. So the basic premise of a lot of absurdism is that, like, that as we just discussed, you need to have like a base level of references, and then you tweak from that. And I think we're at a point in internetness that we're never going to have that. So why don't you embrace it in this chaotic way? And that's what, to me, that's what core is about. And I kind of enjoy it. Like, yeah, as this sort of like kind of mind, like your brain can't get all the references and you're just watching it and you're like, what is happening? Oh, I love it. Like, so I think that's, yeah, it acknowledges the kind of space that TikTok has created in a way of like hyper niches. Yeah.
Core for
Core
audiences to look up later. We're nearing the end of the session video. I guess as a kind of quick wrap-up question, do you have any advice that you would like to share with emerging writers or artists who are looking to be more kind of experimental in the digital space?
Yeah, I would say like ask what about the digital space your work like connects to, like why do you want to tell it, and think of it, it's making a decision to tell something in digital space is as much as a decision as putting something on in like a shipyard or a stage or making it a film. Like, so what is it like? Be conscious of the space and the tools of it, and make sure they have something to do with what you're saying. Like, it doesn't have to be about the internet or technology, but I think often, like, I always, and it's contestable, but like I think there's like this prize where it's just like, it's for digital literatures, and it can be like anything that's just been printed online. Like, it's for a poem that could be in a journal that's online, and I'm just like, what is, like, to me that feels very bad. Yeah, but that is my controversial opinion. And good luck to that.
I don't disagree with you.
But yeah. And I feel like it's actually often, it cuts off like other works that are like, that can't be transcribed in that way, but are actually much more digitally interesting and are saying, are you really using this experience of being in this frame? So yeah, I think that's just like a prompt or a challenge, and not all your work will do that, but like I think it's a good thing to return to as a way to measure the ambition of what you're doing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great note to kind of wrap up this session on. Thanks so much, Vidya, for talking with me tonight. Where can people check out your work?
On my very unupdated website, or my Insta as a link tree. Yeah, just Google
Fantastic.
me.
And thanks to everybody who's been tuning in and leaving comments in the chat tonight. We really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, this session is going to be available on YouTube as a resource. And it's going to be captioned in the coming days. Forever. Yeah.
Forever.
Forever. So the heat death of Google. So yeah, if you'd like to revisit any of tonight's conversation, you can. There's going to be another Toolkits live session in 2 weeks. On Tuesday, the 11th of July, our Toolkits nonfiction facilitator, Hasib Harani, is going to sit down with Ruby Rose Pivot Marsh live here on Express Media's YouTube. So pop it in your calendar and have a wonderful night, everybody. Have a wonderful night, Vidya. Thanks for coming.
See ya.